Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Inventing Construction. I'm Ross Griffin, and today we have a very interesting guest, James Garner. Myself and James have been interacting online in a couple of conferences over the last number of years, so it's great to have him on the show. But let me introduce the topics before James jumps on and introduces himself. The main topic today is the explosion of AI. It's the buzz around the industry. It has been for the last number of years. We're going to discuss why has AI become so popular now, even though it's been around for decades. How are Gleeds embracing AI? James is going to dig in a little bit there. What will the biggest impacts be in our industry in the next number of years, over the next decades? And what is James's advice around AI for people listening today? Because obviously it is the buzzword. But let's not hesitate anymore. James, perhaps I can hand it over to you, and you can give a little introduction to yourself, your past, your present, and what you guys have been doing. It'd be nice to hear.
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk about this subject because it is such a hot topic, as you say. My background is, I'm not a tech person, never was kind of a coder or anything. My background is very much in construction. I had sort of 20 years on the tools, as it were, as a quantity surveyor, delivering some amazing projects throughout the UK and a stint in Paris as well, actually. And I got to spend a lot of time in the education sector, which was really kind of fulfilling because you got to build premises and buildings that you could see being put to incredible use. So I worked in schools, I worked for universities, a lot of the Oxbridge colleges, Imperial College and what have you. But I always had this kind of nagging kind of feeling that there was a better way of doing things. So my interest in tech, which had always been there, I'd always been interested in tech as a kind of enabler to be able to do things better, because I always saw it as a means to an end, as a way of being able to do things better, whether that was in my personal life or whether in work life. And actually, when I was at university, when I did my kind of research and my dissertation, it was looking at how tech might influence construction. And this was back in, where we're going.
Don't go too far back now, James. Don't go too far back.
Well, pretty far back. We're going to the last century, so probably ended in 1999. I graduated in 2000.
Very good.
So quite a way back, actually. And that was looking at tech, our prediction of where we were going in 10 years' time. So I always had my kind of ear to the ground as to what was going on and was very kind of aware of what was happening with artificial intelligence. But then what happened is I got the opportunity around 2020 to move into a slightly different role within Gleeds, which was to take on the head of Insight and Analytics, it was called then, which was not so tech. That was more looking at market reports and writing all of our kind of TPIs and things like that. But it was starting to move into that area because I was also looking at data, which is obviously an important part of tech. And then that eventually got subsumed into a much wider digital team. So it was kind of very lucky, everything just kind of came together, and my interest in both construction and business and tech all kind of came together. And now I'm very proud to be part of the Gleeds digital team. And I'm able to kind of revisit some of those themes that I've been thinking about throughout my whole career, and going all the way back to 2017, or it might be in 2016, when I first started playing around with what we're now calling artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And I guess that leads us nicely into that first subtopic is, why has AI become so popular now? And a lot of the people I speak to and articles I'm reading, of course, and the podcasts I'm listening to is saying, like, AI has been around kind of for decades, but it just has made a progression in the last number of years that we're now seeing influence not just our professional lives, but obviously our private lives as well. Everybody's talking about in every sector and every part of the world right now. So why is that? Why has it become so popular?
Yeah, it's a good question, because as you say, AI as a concept is nothing new. It's been around, it's been around for absolutely hundreds of years, really, in terms of trying to imagine the way that we can utilize machines to replicate human beings. But the actual term was coined in the 1950s. And soon after that, the term machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, was coined. The way I describe it is as our imaginations were way ahead of the tech. Yeah. So, the 1950s kind of got us familiar with the idea of a different future, like cartoons like the Jetsons
Yeah.
and things like that. But so we could imagine it, but we didn't have the tech. And there were these things that happened throughout the last sort of 60, 70 years called AI winters. And the AI winters were basically where we hit a block, where the tech couldn't do where we wanted it to go, and people got a little bit despondent about it. So I think what happened, the big change, has actually been the rise of generative AI, and what people will be familiar with is ChatGPT. And that was fundamental. It was a fundamental shift, because what happened was everyone kind of understood AI, but it always felt very analytical. And it was, we talk about concepts like machine learning. So I kind of divide it up into two. There's analytical AI and creative AI. Analytical AI is very much around spotting patterns, and it's more in the hands of the techies who put these algorithms together that, create something that you can interact with. So a good example of that is your Google Maps or your Netflix algorithms. So we've been using it for yonks, but it wasn't exciting, because it was just something that happened in the background that somebody else did to us, and they used this machine learning concept, and it was AI powered, but we weren't driving it as such. Now, what happened with ChatGPT is that they took this concept that had been invented by Google back in around 2017 called the transformer, which was a technology that enables effectively pattern recognition within a large language set, or what's called large language models. And the T in ChatGPT stands for transformer, which is this piece of technology that Google invented back in around 2017. The reason why that's so important is because whilst it is effectively still sort of pattern recognition and numbers, it enables you to be creative with it, and it enables you to input and speak to it as if you were a human. So the big kind of brain wave for everyone when ChatGPT hit was, wow, I can just talk to this like it was a team member, and then I can get a response back which is creative, which was the other big change. It wasn't just pattern recognition, it could actually produce things, whether that was drafts of reports, whether it was emails, that's a lot of people's sort of instruction to it, or whether now it's music or video or what have you. It's actually being creative. And so it went away from being a back office task that manifested itself in some kind of app that you might use, that you would have no idea that AI was at play, to something that you go, wow, I am interacting with AI. And that was the big change.
And it transcends all industries as well, which is super interesting. Yeah. And again, private life, people in private life are using it at home and playing around with it and all of that. And I think it's a key shift for the construction industry, yes, but also for us, I think in humanity. Whenever I hear AI and machine learning, I always think Terminator and Skynet. That's where I relate it back to. For some reason, my mind just goes straight there, and don't push the big button. But it is creating this kind of buzz in the industry that I guess we haven't seen in a number of years. Maybe around BIM in the noughties, perhaps to a certain degree, but more so now because it's more accessible from the perception of ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever systems people are using. It seems to be more accessible, and it's creating this huge kind of question mark, I guess, where's the future going for everybody, including humanity at the forefront.
And there's some very clever minds trying to work that out. But it's interesting. You kind of talked about the Terminator scenario, but it's really not that far off, because that, as I said earlier, that was our kind of creative instinct as to where this can go. What's so exciting, and not just in construction for us generally, is we're going to have the pleasure of living through that period of time where we're going to have one of the most monumental shifts. And you can relate it back to, can you imagine what it would have been like back in the kind of feudal system when you a bunch of farmers and they first saw the tractor, and they would have thought, what the hell is this thing, and what is this going to do to my career?
It's not replacing my horse.
It took away some of the grunt work, and those people went on to do different jobs. But it was a monumental shift to a feudal system to a kind of more industrial system. And now we're going to move from this industrial system to this much more kind of tech-driven system. But I'm extremely optimistic about what it can mean for us, and particularly in construction, because there is so much wastage in construction. And undoubtedly there's things that we can do better. And I see the use of artificial intelligence as a huge opportunity. That's not discounting the risks that come with it, but with all technology comes risks, but it's how we deal with it. And the worst thing you can possibly do is put your head
ignore it,
under the parapet and ignore it.
Yeah. It's inevitability, isn't it? Again, it's similar in terms of conversation from the BIM conversation a number of years back about whether it will happen and should we, and what's the value for us. It's all of those questions are interesting questions, of course, but they're irrelevant because it's an inevitability. Like the focus on sustainability is now, it's inevitability. It's not a question of if, but actually what should we do about it now? How do we implement it? How do we manage it?
But the BIM thing is quite interesting because that was still relatively niche in that not every single construction project used BIM, and it was a hard sell.
Yeah.
And it was very specific to a certain sector of a certain industry, whereas artificial intelligence is more akin to when Excel came in, something which is all multi-purpose, and it's going to impact every part of your life, and not just construction. And I suppose similar to smartphones, when they came in, how that's become the norm. So I think it can also boost the adoption of BIM. Funny enough, I think this is to me, artificial intelligence is the missing ingredient in making BIM successful.
Yeah, just in the mindset shift for people in general, I think they're more open to the idea that actually people are now in the conversation of data and information, and how it's now becoming kind of a major topic for them. Maybe a few years ago it wasn't, business as usual type of situation people were involved in. Now it's more of, well, no, hang on a second, we are creating data, we are doing this. And I think the ChatGPT and the AI development over the last number of years has helped to progress that quite quickly. I think you're right there. But tell me, James, from you guys in Gleeds, how are Gleeds embracing AI? I'm sure you're working on some exciting projects. Maybe there's someone you can give examples about, and others are more confidential, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, like all companies around the world, it's still, what you've got to remember, it's still really, really early, right? So think about this. When the App Store came out, the Apple App Store, that was a monumental thing, but it was 2 years until Instagram came, and another 2 years till Uber came. So you've got to imagine it like that. The technology's there, so that it's like the factory's there to power electricity, but it took however. Someone told me the analogy of the power plant and the toaster. So the power plant's invented, and then it takes quite a long time for the toaster to come along, which needs a power plant. And that's where we are. So we've invented the power plant, which is the AI, the creative AI. And the use cases will take a bit longer to come, and people will fumble about a bit. That's not saying we're fumbling around, but it's what I call experimentation at the moment, because it's still so new. And the other thing is, it's very difficult to future-proof what you're doing. So there's a good example of Bloomberg, right? So Bloomberg decided that they were going to invest a load of money when GPT 3.5 came out, which was the first ChatGPT was originally powered on a model called ChatGPT 3.5. And they spent loads of money on developing a Bloomberg GPT. And they thought, we're well ahead of the curve here, everything's great. And then when GPT-4 came out, it blew it out of the water. Even their fine-tuned model. So you've also got to be really careful that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So what we're doing is we are experimenting. We are doing some of what I would call the obvious things to do, like the fine-tuning of large language models. And we are experimenting with what I call agentic workflows, which is the agent thing that a lot of people are talking about, which is almost like a single-purpose type of AI. And we are then partnering also with third parties, because bearing in mind my point about reinventing the wheel, you don't want to be, doing something that someone else is very focused and niche on. So we're doing all of those things. But more important than all of that, I think, is actually the tech is one side of it, but it's the people and the culture, especially in our industry. So for me, the most important thing that I'm doing is around what we're calling the upskilling, and that's why I was so pleased to come on this podcast, because it's an industry-wide thing. It's breaking down the barriers, taking away the fear factor of AI. Well, most people think, it's going to take away my jobs, and telling people to be optimistic about this, because you are so lucky to be working in a period of time where you're going to see a monumental shift in how we approach life, and to embrace it. And you can embrace it by upskilling yourself. And there's so many ways to upskill yourself. It doesn't mean you've all got to become coders and understand Python and things like that, although that's a pretty cool thing to do if you do want to.
And if you're a QS also, there's a value in
if
that,
you're absolutely, there's a lot of people who have gone down the rabbit hole, and they've gone down a certain, now doing masters. We've got people in Gleeds who are doing masters in artificial intelligence because they've gone down that rabbit hole. But you don't need to do. My point is, you don't need to do that. If you're a contractor on site, and you're thinking, well, how the hell am I going to get to grips with this? Don't worry, it's not that hard. And there's a lot of resources out there in places like the APM, the Association of Project Managers, the RICS. There's things like Data Camp. Even Google give away free courses on these things. There is tons and tons of stuff where you can upskill yourself. And what we're trying to do at Gleeds is give the people that ability to upskill themselves, whether that's through lunch and learns, whether that's through one-day courses, whether that's through giving them the ability to undertake much longer courses, because nothing will be more important for future-proofing your skills than that, because the tech will move so fast. It's not like you can say, well, I've learned that now, therefore I'm safe for 20 years.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like learning the trade anymore. I guess if you go back to the olden days, the Industrial Revolution, etc., it's moving so fast now. You need to continually upskill yourself. But you're right, the amount of free information out there, the likes of YouTube, go on and Google and away you go. Yeah. It's accessible to everybody now. It's just about people having an interest. But I do like your explanation there about the biggest impact really is the upskilling factor, getting the people within the teams, within the group, within the business, the company, the industry, to a level of understanding. And from there, people, as you mentioned, can get they can go down the rabbit hole because the interests just spike, and there's this huge kind of reaction, if you like, internally in them, and they start diving into in a greater detail. And I find that hugely impressive, I must say, for people that started out in a career, let's say quantity surveying like yourself, and then they take a left turn and they go into something completely different, albeit with the influences that they've brought over the previous career, if you like, previous 10, 20 years or whatever. I think that's hugely impressive that people...
Well, that's what makes people a unicorn, doesn't it? Because you bring in these two domains together to create something which basically didn't exist before. So it's and the other thing I would say about artificial intelligence is changing your thought around it, because we are so used to being passive users of software. As in, we use Excel. And so the most people's first interaction with artificial intelligence is something along the lines of, help me write an email slightly better, which is great. There is some value to that, right? I'm not dismissing it, but that is not, you are scratching the surface. Really, what you've got to change your thought pattern to look at artificial intelligence and treat it as a thought partner. That's the best description I've had of it from a very famous author called Jeff Woods, who I had on my show actually recently. Right. He says, you've got to treat this, don't think of it as kind of another Google or a legacy kind of software. You almost got to treat it as a partner, somebody who's working with you. And when you make that switch and you have what I call the light bulb moment, and you realize, okay, I'm doing this wrong, I need to approach this slightly differently, then the gloves are off, and you see use cases everywhere. There's a really good thing that he told me to do, this author, the guy's called Jeff Woods. He wrote a book called The AI-Driven Leader. So I recommend everyone to read that book. But he said, if you take one thing away from this podcast, take a sticky note and write on it, could AI do this for me, and stick it underneath your monitor and look at that all the time. And before you do any task or any action, ask yourself, how could AI help you?
It's going to fundamentally change how we approach every task and every project. A couple of weeks ago, I was chatting to a guy about how AI is going to completely change the contracts management and claims management process. If we get into a position where we're recording every single meeting and every decision taken, and just loading it and putting it into and storing it, and allowing AI then to filter through all of that and come back to us with the instructions and so on that were taken within meetings. And I could see the guy's eyes open up going, oh, jeez, I'm not sure we would be allowed to record anything. I don't think people would
Well,
allow, the challenges they have around.
Well, it will change behaviours, won't it?
Yeah.
Because, if people know that this is being recorded and could eventually come out and be used in a claim, it will hopefully change behaviours and make us a little bit more professional in that regard, because I'm sure you're the same. I've been at site meetings where you're thinking this is not the way you should be treating other people.
Exactly.
So, that's another kind of optimism side of it.
I think it's super exciting from that perspective. If you're a quantity surveyor looking at kind of your role and what excites you, and if it is claims and contracts, or if it is cost estimating, I think that's going to change dramatically. Cost estimating as well, and cost control, and it's all fundamentally going to change. Everything we've learned basically with the RICS and has been developed over the last 150 years or 200 years is fundamentally going to change now in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Which I think
and we're not the only ones. The concept of a profession, you've got to remember, also going back to that analogy, whether that's the surveying profession or the law profession, is all based on the print media. Yeah. So it came around in the industrial times, and it was a way of kind of creating a moat between the skills, the people who've got the skills, and the people who don't have the skills. And you had to get entry to that skills, you had to pay, and what's going to happen is that's going to be democratized, and that you won't need skilled people to do a lot of the stuff because the AI will do it. And the professions and the institutions need to think about very carefully what are their role in this post-industrial era where we're using AI for a lot of things if they want to remain relevant. I'm pleased to say that the RICS, so I'm on a working group with the RICS to create, and I think it's out for public consultation at the moment, but they've released a using AI safely within surveying guidance note that should be released formally pretty soon. So they are looking at it. I know the APM have also got a lot of guidance around AI, and the PMI, who are the Project Management Institute, they do an awful lot. I think, pretty much every single seminar they do or webinars is around that. So they are kind of recognizing that this is a big shift, but and that's probably because you've got to think about what is the role of institutions and professions going to be in 5-10 years' time.
It kind of leads us nicely into the third part of our topics is what will be the biggest impact in our industry over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I think it's fundamentally going to change all our roles. And I've never thought about it in the sense that, well, our profession might not necessarily be needed anymore. It'll pivot to something completely different, perhaps, and quantity surveying as we know it won't exist. But it'll pivot into something different. We'll call it something different, perhaps.
Yeah, you still need the people, the domain understanding of what's going on, but it was ever thus, I mean, the quantity survey of today is very different from the quantity survey of the 1910s. Yeah. It evolves, but I think the difference is it's the speed of change that's going to be very, very different. There's another good book which I would advise people to read by the Suskind father and sons. It's called The Future of the Professions. It was written quite a while ago, actually, but it's that's the best kind of prediction of where the professions might be in the next few years. When you talk about 15, 20 years, I kind of stop predictions after sort of 5 or 10 years, because I think when you start looking at 15, 20 year time span, not just in our professions, I think you're going down a rabbit hole, which is because by then we will have this artificial super intelligence. So it's so hard to predict where we'll be. So where we are at the moment is the OpenAI, the guys who released ChatGPT, they released a roadmap, 5-step roadmap to effectively artificial general intelligence. The step 1 was your chatbots, which is your ChatGPT. And then step 2 was the reasoning capabilities. So that's the latest models that have come out. They don't just chat to you, they can actually reason and they can think. And actually OpenAI just released a new one yesterday called Deep Learning, which can produce a PhD level report with citations and everything. Within a few minutes. So we're firmly past level 2. Level 3 is the agentic which is what people are starting to experiment with agents. When you get to level sort of 4 and 5, you are going to this concept called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And there's different definitions of it, but it basically means that where AI is as good or better than humans at most tasks. And we're going to get there very soon. Whether that's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years is up for debate, but we're very close to getting to some concept of AGI. The step after that is called ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. That's where I'll stop making predictions because we do get into Terminator territory. Because what we haven't talked about, well, it is because, we've talked about AI, but when you actually look at all the other technologies coming alongside that, like robotics, and for construction, that's going to be huge. When you embed this AI technology within humanoid robots, who are then going to be building a lot of the buildings that we have over the course of the next decade, then you're fundamentally changing the game. So you've got to look at it in the whole. You've got to look at all the technologies that are sort of rising up together at the same time.
It makes it interesting and scary at the same time, looking at a future like that of something that's completely different. We talk a lot about solving the labor supply issues and the skills shortage issues and the inefficiencies. But if we can implement, again, if you're talking about AI that has the ability to write a PhD level report in seconds, we're already surpassed what we can do as humans, and somehow we need to leverage that. There's a line I heard a couple of weeks back on a podcast, was that the next level or next layer of need from a business perspective that humans can give is that soft approach, not that hard skill, but it's the soft skills, the management of people, the management of emotions, the management of interaction, if you like.
The emotional intelligence.
Exactly, that emotional intelligence component, and that's going to become top of the list in anybody hiring people in the future, and we're not sure we're teaching that at the moment to a level that's probably necessary. It's always about the hard skill, and if AI is going to improve and or remove the need for those hard skills, we need to be focusing within our education on the softer stuff, that emotional intelligence component. And I find that interesting as well, actually. How
it's very interesting. It goes back to that concept of behavior. This technology will enable us to change behaviors, because when you're on a site meeting or whatever it is, some of the behaviors, as we've talked about, sometimes aren't acceptable, and because that's people dealing with opinions. So it'll be he said that, and then two people will fall out. When you take that away, so you're dealing with data and you're dealing with fact, that changes the behaviors, because then you can think about solutions to the issue, rather than two people blaming each other about something that happened, that was reported a month ago, that happened 2 months ago, and someone's trying to take the blame. So I'm optimistic from that point of view that it is going to change behaviors. And you're right, we need people. The one thing that artificial intelligence is going to find very, very difficult to replicate is human emotions and human intelligence. And you're still going to need that, because you're still going to need somebody in charge of the building, and you're still going to have a client who's going to be in charge of the business case, and those two people are still going to need to interact. But we can elevate what we do as construction professionals. This is where I'm optimistic about it, to harness AI so that we can improve some of the stats, because there's terrible stats around how successful projects are. There's a guy called Bent Flubier from Oxford University who did a study of 15,000 projects, not just construction projects, but projects generally, which found that only 1 in 200 projects finish on time, on budget, and to the benefits outlined in the business case. So it's not like, I always say, you shouldn't push back on AI, because it's not like we're standing here saying everything's fine, leave us alone.
Exactly.
We've got quite a way to go to improve what we do in the outputs.
What would your advice be around kind of AI for the people listening, especially for people that want to get involved in it and are curious, or maybe are already involved and want to increase their knowledge base?
That's recently changed slightly because I get influenced by so many people I listen to and books I read and stuff. And I had someone on my podcast, because I do a podcast myself called Project Flux, which is all about AI and construction. And we had someone on it recently. My advice up until I spoke to him, and it still stands, I will just lay on top of that, is if you're worried about AI and you're just not sure where to start, say, you're 50-year-old project manager and you've heard about it, but you just don't know what to do something in a safe space, like something away from work. It might be a holiday that you're planning, or maybe a kitchen renovation that you're doing at home, and try using it for something like that, because you can then use it in your safe space. No one's kind of watching what you're doing. You're not worried about confidentiality. You can experiment and break it if you like, and that often gives people the light bulb moment that I call, that they realize, oh wow, okay, well, I can go and do that at work. So that's a really kind of handy thing anyone can do, because a lot of these models are free anyway, so you don't have to pay anything and you can try it out. I mean, I like, a good one is try it out on holiday. Like, get AI to help you plan out your next holiday. It will save you so much time, so much money, and so much stress. To lay on top of that is going back to what I said about changing your thought process about what AI does. So think about the activity that provides 80% of the value of your, because it's the old 80 to Pareto rule that 20% of your effort will give 80% of the value. So whatever you do, it doesn't matter whether you're a site manager or construction manager, QS, whatever you do, work out what is the thing that drives 80% of the value, and then work out how AI can help you do that. Because if you can crack that, you're cracking 80% of your value. You will free yourself up so much to do
other things. Yeah. You get into the emotional intelligence piece, give people time and all of that.
Exactly.
I think that's been it's the fear aspect, I guess, and I like that idea of in your own time at home, just start figuring out what free apps are available, and just start testing them and seeing. And the one about planning your holiday, I was just talking to my wife last night about we usually go away in July on the motorcycle, and we were going to go up by Scotland and so on. I was going, let's sit down and plan that. And I go, you mentioned that, I kind of go, maybe I'll get AI to do it on the side and see what happens, and then we can plan the old-fashioned way as well and see what the best route is, and decide later what we should do.
Exactly. But the thing is, right, you don't do it. And this is why you got to experiment. You got to come to these things yourself. But you could go into ChatGPT and say, plan me a holiday to Italy for 2 weeks, and it will do something. But you've got to change your approach to it. You've got to think about. Your output will be as good as your input, and your input has to go around. You have to give it context. So if you're going on holiday, you've got to say, these are the dates I'm going on holiday. This is where I'm going. These are the kind of experiences I'd like to have. This is who I'm going with. Give it as much context as possible. Give it a role. Always say to the AI, I want you to act as a tour guide or a travel agent who's got an incredible history of, let's say, Italy in this example, and I want you to act to give me not just the kind of tourist traps, but to give me a rich history of this particular destination you're going. And then the third one, and this is the most important, is, and this changes your concept about how you interact with AI, you want to say to it, I want you then to ask me 3 to 5 questions, 1 question at a time, to make sure you understand my requirements properly. And then what happens there, that changes everything, because you get the AI to talk to you, and it asks you questions that you answer, and that feeds the context, and that will then improve the quality of the output.
Which is why you're changing it from a search engine type function, as you mentioned at the beginning, to more of an interactive, where you're communicating with the AI in order to get the most benefits from it. And I think that's a lot of us are struggling to get our head around. Actually, is that fact? You're going, but it's a computer. Again, we relate it to what we know, so we're going search engine type feel, and it's so much more than that, and can be so much more than that within our lives. But it's super exciting times ahead, I think. But James, I appreciate your time today, and it was great to have you on the podcast and to chat again. And I hope to see you sometime in the future when I'm around London.
I'll be pleased to, and I'll be very pleased to come into the studio at some point as well. So thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed talking about this stuff, and I hope your listeners get something out of it.
Yeah. Of course, if you have any questions, check out James's podcast as well, and connect on LinkedIn online. More than happy to have conversations with people if anybody has any questions, and we'll put links to the books you mentioned as well, James, up online so people can.
I also have a newsletter which is free, which is a weekly newsletter which I wrote just to help people, because there's so much stuff going on like every week. I mean, last week there was like 4 massive stories, one of which was the DeepSeek story.
Yeah.
So we do this very quick, like it takes 3 minutes to read email that just pulls everything together and tells you what it means for you in the project delivery profession. So people are free to subscribe to that.
And you can do that on LinkedIn, James.
Well, it's a separate link. I am active on LinkedIn, but I'll provide you with a separate link.
No bother. We'll stick it in the bottom, so yeah, and we'll have it there. Excellent. Cheers, bud. Speak to you soon. So,
thank you so much.
Thanks very much for listening. There's a LinkedIn link below in the show notes. We would love to connect with you.
We hope you enjoyed it and have you with us in the next one. Thank you very much.